C'est final.
Welcome to the Service Game, where we serve you and serve starts the story. I'm your host, Ivy Jane, and in today's episode, I will be previewing the Roland Garros happening for the next 2 weeks. So yeah, let's just get right into our first segment, the toss. So the main news I want to talk about in the toss comes from this sort of players boycott in quotation marks that took place this year at this year's Roland Garros' media day. So I have linked an article written by The Athletic, which I think really explains exactly what they did and why they did what they did in details. But the gist of it is that they kind of, during the Roland Garros media day, which is when players talk to the press, they walked out after 15 minutes. So they did 10 minutes in the news conference room, another 5 minutes via Zoom. And then they just walked out because it kind of represented the fact that Grand Slams on average only allocate 15% their revenues to the prize monies which the players can receive. So sort of to put that into perspective, also all the stats I got is from this linked in the show notes, but a lot of the US team sports, for example, big leagues like NFL, NBA, and MLB, the players receive close to 50% of the league's revenues. So what that means is, let's say the NFL, they generated a certain amount of revenue from the fans, from their sponsors, etc. They're paying their players around 50% of that, whereas in Grand Slams, they're only paying players about 15% of that. So that is that. And personally, I think this is a step towards the right direction. I just don't know how big of an impact it's going to affect the players, because I honestly just feel like players in general, they don't really want to talk to the press, coming from someone who wants to get into journalism, especially in tennis. I think 15 minutes is already plenty. However, I really do appreciate what the 15 minutes stands for. It stands for the 15% revenue. And I think mostly it's not going to have a substantial effect on the tournament, but maybe it would just impact the relationship between the media that's sponsoring the tournament and the tournament itself, rather than just affecting the tournament, if that makes any sense. But I think at least we're doing something. It's just when a lot of players are asked, I think it's a good gateway for the press to ask about this topic. A lot of players were saying that, I still don't want to get fined. So it's sort of just they're trying to do the least amount of things possible to get the result they wanted without getting fined and without sacrificing, which I think is not necessarily the way where actual tangible and effective solutions can achieved. I think in order to achieve something that's more substantial, players should be willing to sacrifice and take the fine in order to get to a greater outcome.
Super, impeccable. Le chef-d'œuvre absolu.
To truly understand Roland Garros, feel the emotions.
And that is the ad of this year's Roland Garros. And even though this year's tournament has been led up by this boycott situation, I think, especially on a women's side, there's a lot to talk about. So let's get right into our main segment, the hit. So I think I want to start off talking about a match that took place. I'm recording this on a Sunday, the first day of Roland Garros. So there has been some matches played, and I think there was a really high quality round one match on the women's side, which is the number 26 seed Hailey Baptiste, who defeated Barbara Krejcikova with the score of 6-7, 7-6, 6-2. And I think the first two set of this was actually really, really high quality. And in the second set, notably, Baptiste saved 2 match points in the tiebreak. She was down 4-6 and she ended up coming back and winning 8-6, winning 4 consecutive points in a row. And I think during the deciding set, Barbara Krejcikova definitely faded physically. And I really have high hopes for Baptiste in this tournament because leading up to the preparation leading up to Roland Garros, she did beat Sabalenka in Madrid. However, I know in Rome, which is a tournament that's right after Madrid, she lost to Svitolina 1-6, 2-6. But also we have to keep in mind of the fact that Svitolina was the eventual champion in Rome. But I think one of the matches I've circled is a potential round 3 match against Elena Rybakina. I think Rybakina has not been her, she's obviously, I think, one of the best players this year, for sure. But I think leading up to Roland Garros, she wasn't as sort of in shape compared to how she was when she just won the Australian Open and throughout the Middle East. So I think Baptiste do have a chance of beating Rybakina, especially because I feel like Baptiste is overall, just compared to her game, she's a better player on clay compared to Rybakina. Rybakina is a better player on hard court than how she plays on clay. And I also would like to mention some round 1 matches that I have circled that if you guys want to keep an eye out for. So the first one being Paolini versus Yastremska. The second one, Osaka versus Laura Siegemund. Kenin versus Stearns, which I think is currently happening right now. Okay, yeah, it just ended. Stearns won 6-3, 6-3. Kalinskaya versus Louis Boisson. Coco Gauff versus Taylor Townsend. And Iva Jovic versus Alex Yala. And for my prediction on the women's side, I think this is definitely a really hard prediction compared to the men's side where it's much, much more straightforward. I think there's a lot of players that are in pretty top shape, I'd say, coming into Roland Garros. I mean, we have Coco Gauff, who made it to the final. We have Elena Svitolina, who just won a title in Rome. Sabalenka, despite not playing that much, is, I think, still the top contender. We have I mentioned Coco Gauff. We have Iga Swiatek. There's just a lot of players, I think, that are title contenders. And even players like Marta Kotyuk, Hailey Baptiste, Mira Andreeva, who maybe aren't ranked in the world's top 5. I think because of their form coming into Roland Garros, they should not be just ignored. But for my semifinals, I think I have Svitolina against Swiatek. I know Svitolina did beat Swiatek in Rome, and that run was actually legendary, but I think I still have, in this case, especially in Paris, I have Swiatek coming through to the finals because I feel because of Swiatek's really, really incredibly successful history here, I think she just has an upper hand. And on the other half, I have Sabalenka against Gauff, and personally, I think this is going to be a replay of last year's final. I think it's not going to be as controversial with all the things that happened last year with just Sabalenka saying all those controversial things. I think Gauff is going to come through just because whenever I think she has a really successful tournament before the Grand Slam, she often performs pretty well and go on a pretty deep run at the next following Grand Slam. So I have Gauff coming through, and I think the final will be between Iga Swiatek and Coco Gauff. I don't know how likely it is for Gauff to defend her title just because defending a Grand Slam title is such an incredibly difficult task. So I think Swiatek will have the upper hand there. Okay, now we'll move on to the men's side, which I think is much straightforward. The first thing I want to talk about mainly is there's 5 players who I personally thought was going to challenge Sinner on his road of defending the title, or just in general making the tournament more engaging. They're all withdrawn. So to start off with, the biggest one, Carlos Alcaraz. I covered this, I think, last week, and also the news came out that he also withdrew from Queens and Wimbledon, so it means that he's out of the entire grass swing. Lorenzo Musetti also withdrawn, Jack Draper, Hoja Rune, and most recently Arthur Fils, who I believe withdrew yesterday. He was actually practicing on court. He was at the tournament. I think it's just something to do with his lower back, which he has been dealing with for the last year. And I know his comeback has been just, I think, exceeded everyone's expectations. I think it's just he needs to figure out what is wrong with his back and deal with that injury accordingly. And I do think it's wise for him to not play in this tournament, to prioritize sort of the long run, just because he is still really, really young. And the favorite, Jannik Sinner, there's not that much to talk about here. He's definitely the favorite. The only, I think, the only impact or something that can sort of impact him negatively, I'd say, is definitely just the weather, because he does not do well in heat. And this year's Roland Garros has been looking like it's going to be in the mid-30s, which is not typically what we're used to, but because he is the world number 1, he has priority of requesting a night session. And with that, I want to talk about the 2 main players who I think have a chance of challenging him, Novak Djokovic and Alexander Zverev. I think Zverev has a chance. I think almost in a way, Zverev has a bigger chance than Djokovic, just because he's more of a known factor. Even though he hasn't performed that well coming up to Roland Garros, he's so much younger than Djokovic, and I just think he's going to benefit. And if he can seize the opportunity, which I don't know if he can, because I don't necessarily associate him with someone that would just take risks and clutch these opportunities, I think he's going to benefit the most. And in terms of Djokovic, I mean, he beat Sinner at Australia, the last Grand Slam. So, however, he's barely played tennis, and he lost round 1 in Rome. So we really don't know, and I just think overall he's just a complete big unknown. Some round 1 matches, I only have 3. Djokovic versus Ampeci Pericard, Gaston versus Monfils, because this is Monfils' last Roland Garros ever, Thomas Mahatch versus Sisu Bergs, which was already won in straight sets by Thomas Mahatch. In terms of predictions, I have Zverev beating Djokovic/Ruud in the bottom half. I just think that Zverev will come through. I mean, also Djokovic is such a question mark. I think if Djokovic is not at his best, Ruud should be able to beat him, just because Ruud is really consistent on clay, and he did make it to the Rome final. But I think both of them will come short against Zverev, considering he did beat Bonzi in 3 straight sets today. And I think Medvedev's going to make it to the semifinal, and he's going to ultimately lose to Sinner. And I mean, for the finals, I definitely just have Sinner winning. Okay, welcome to the follow-through. Really not that much to talk about, I guess. I kind of just mentioned a bunch of round 1 matches already that I think are worth mentioning. Other things, just Roland Garros is happening. And, there's something I do want to mention. So, The Athletic is actually doing this, live update on the tournament, and I have linked their like live update. I just linked their whole athletics page if you guys want to go check it out. I also linked the Roland Garros official site if you guys want to go like look at the draws and see which match you guys are interested in. And they also have a Roland Garros guide published by The Athletic that I really enjoy. I think it's a pretty useful guide. You can basically go on the website I linked in my show note. You can select the men's tour or the women's tour, the country of the players, and if you click on the player that pops up, it gives you a lot of information about their French Open, their 2026 results. So yeah, and there's a little short blurb about the prediction of how they will do. So I found that to be really helpful, and just you can get a lot of information. So if you guys are interested in looking at that, please go check out my show notes. But yeah, that's all. Thank you so much for listening. Please subscribe if you're listening on YouTube, and rate my show if you're listening on other streaming platforms. It helps out a lot. And also, please comment down below who you think will win on both the WTA and the ATP Tour. Yeah, I'll see you guys next week. Let the serves continue. Bye.